Was I the pawn in the chess of the secret? Blessing wondered.
Long before the pulpit and applause, there was a night that changed everything. A young woman named Grace vanished from the town. Whispers said heartbreak, others said disgrace. But no one knew the full story, except Pastor Francis, and he buried it deep under sermons and silence. Long before the pulpit glowed with light, a shadow lingered in the corner of Pastor Francis's past. Her name was Grace, a gentle soul torn by betrayal, silenced by shame, and the secret? It never truly died. It lived on in the very heart of his home. Late at night, Blessing found herself drawn to her mother's old photo once again. The questions in her heart refused to rest. Who was this woman to whom she owed her smile, her strength, and maybe her sorrow? Years had passed. Grace, once vibrant and full of life, now lived quietly in a rundown part of town. The world had moved on, her name forgotten in many places, but not in her own heart. Every passing Sunday bell reminded her of all she lost and all she endured in silence. She never stopped praying for him, not because she excused the pain, but because her heart refused to harden. Grace remembered the man before the secret, the Francis she once loved. But now, she was only a memory, tucked away in his rise to greatness. Years ago, she overheard everything, the threats, the cover-up, the silence that followed her scream. That night, something in her died, but nobody noticed. They chose the pastor's future over her dignity, and the church, it prayed and moved on. He tells himself he did what he had to, that the ministry had to be protected, that he repented. But repentance doesn't erase memory. And every time the house goes quiet, Grace's eyes return in that frame, asking why. She told him, "Confess and let God restore you." But Pastor Francis didn't. And so Mama Faith carried a wound, a holy one. She stayed, raised Blessing, and kept his secret, but it never stopped burning. Whispers began to stir in high places. The elders had heard things, fragments of a past swept under holy rugs. And Pastor Francis could feel it. The ground beneath his pulpit was cracking. Years ago, she cried out, not just in pain, but in betrayal. Rebecca was young, vulnerable, and the man she trusted most, her shepherd, left her bruised in body and spirit. Her cries were buried, just like her name. Behind closed doors, whispers grew louder. The boardroom, once filled with prayers and unity, now echoed with Tao in politics. Loyalty turned into leverage, and those who once bowed their heads in faith now raised their brows in suspicion. Blessing smiled as she served tea to the elders in the church lounge, her voice polite, her movements graceful. But behind the smile was a storm. Every polite gesture was a mask, hiding a lifetime of betrayal. They saw a cheerful church girl, not the child abandoned by truth, nor the woman standing at the edge of her own secrets. The weeks went by, but the silence between Pastor Francis and Mama Faith grew louder. He would sit alone in his study, gazing at the old Bible she once gifted him, and she would quietly serve his meals with the weight of disappointment in her eyes. The warmth in their marriage had grown cold. Guilt had driven a wedge that only the truth could remove. I warned him. I told him no secret stays buried forever. But he chose silence over repentance. And now, I sit in the same house with a man I no longer recognize. A man of God, yes. But even men of God can fall. My heart aches, but my lips are sealed. For how do you love a man whose sins stain your soul too? There was a time when the walls of this house echoed with laughter, with the scent of new beginnings. But that was before the truth rotted its foundations. In the quiet corners of the church and the silence of the home, shadows lingered, and somewhere within them, the name Rebecca still whispered like a ghost. Pastor Francis stood alone at the altar, the very place where he once thundered scriptures and led prayers. Now it was a silent witness to his brokenness. The weight of his secrets pressed heavily on his shoulders, and in the stillness, he finally allowed his soul to speak. He wasn't just a preacher now. He was a man in need of grace. But secrets never walk alone. They trail shame, regret, and consequences like stubborn shadows. Even as Pastor Francis began to speak of grace, his past wasn't done speaking. And in that holy silence, something stirred, a storm waiting to break. She stood at the back, her face cloaked in shadows. But when the light hit just right, Blessing saw it, the face that had haunted her dreams, the woman who bore her smile, her sorrow. Her mother was alive. Time stood still. Blessing couldn't move. Her heart raced, her knees weakened, 1,000 questions screamed in her head. But her lips refused to part. She was face to face with a ghost. And it was her mother. Blessing stood, her hands trembling, her legs felt like lead. But something pushed her forward. Not just curiosity, but a yearning, a need to know why. Why her mother disappeared, why she never came back, and why she was here, in the church that buried the truth.
Her steps echoed in the silence, one after the other, like a heartbeat steadying itself. People turned, whispers started, but Blessing saw no one. She was walking into memory, into revelation, toward the woman who looked like a ghost from the past. Her past.
She raised her eyes, and there she was. A woman with eyes that mirrored hers. Older, wearier, broken. But something deeper called out. Recognition. Two souls locking in silence. It wasn't a greeting. It was a revelation. A silent scream between a mother and her daughter, reunited by truth, not time. Her heart pounded. Every instinct told her to stay, to ask, to scream. But years of silence don't break that easily. So she did the only thing she knew. She turned and walked away. But this time, her steps carried more than sorrow. They carried truth. And then, the dam broke. Rebecca's body folded in on itself, her hands trembling as the truth finally landed. She had seen her daughter, alive, grown, and walking away from her. Again. Pastor Francis stepped back into the church, expecting routine silence. But what he saw crushed him. Rebecca collapsed, sobbing in the pew like a woman finally touched by her ghost. And for the first time in decades, he didn't have a sermon. Only shame. Rebecca didn't look up, but she knew whose footsteps approached. She didn't flinch. She only whispered, "Did you ever tell her?" And Pastor Francis couldn't breathe. Pastor Francis opened his mouth, but the words choked in his throat. He knelt beside Rebecca instead, tears streaming freely. "I failed you. I failed her. And I failed God." Rebecca slowly turned her head to face him. No words, no anger, only pain. But in her eyes, something shifted. The beginning of release. Not for him, not yet, but for herself.
I cried, I broke, I even wished for death. But I found peace, not in your apology, but in God's healing. I forgive you, Pastor Francis, because I've been forgiven too. Pastor Francis stood still. The words pierced deeper than any punishment could. Forgiven? He didn't deserve it. And yet those words, they opened the floodgates of a remorse he had buried for years.
Welcome to Afro Tales, where every story leaves a mark on your soul. Please subscribe, comment, and share this video with a friend.